Hi, everyone, and welcome to our workshop, Navigating the Academic Publication Process. I'm Lisa Rubin, and I'm an associate professor at Kansas State University and the co-editor of Nakata Journal, and I'm going to briefly introduce the amazing panelists here with us today. So first, Dr. Thomas Eicher, who's an assistant professor at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and assistant editor of Sport Entertainment Review and co-editor of Journal of Issues in Intercollegiate Athletics, so welcome. Next, Dr. Joseph Cooper. He's got a long title, so Associate Professor and Dr. J. Keith Motley Endowed Chair of Sport Leadership and Administration from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and co-editor of Journal of Issues in Intercollegiate Athletics. Dr. Amanda Polikova, who's a professor at Bowling Green State University and co-editor and founder of Journal of Athlete Development and Experience. And lastly, Dr. Sarah Sikowski, Assistant Professor at Clemson University. Dr. Sikowski is also a CSRI Research Fellow and co-editor of the Journal of Athlete Development and Experience. So thank you all for your time today and sharing some wisdom and insights into this process for our attendees. I'm going to start with some questions and then we'll open it up, of course, to our audience to ask any questions that you have of our panelists. So starting off, do you have any tips that you recommend for those who are early in their career or graduate students in terms of thinking about building a research agenda and going through the research pipeline? And anyone is welcome to unmute and answer.
There was talk of going in alphabetical order, so I guess I'll go first. So in terms of building your research agenda, I think the first thing that I figured out is you just have to have a passion for it. So it's got to be a question that you're really interested in, because it's going to take over your entire life in a lot of ways, in the sense that you're constantly reading about it, you're reviewing it, you're writing it. And if it's not something you enjoy or have a strong passion for, then it's going to be really hard to stick to it. I know when I started my doctoral program, Dr. Sagas slapped down a whole set of SMQ, JSMs, a couple of JIIA articles, and said, start reading and figure out what you want to do. And that's, I started to find gaps in certain articles that seemed interesting and went down one path for my research agenda, and then through various life changes and things like that, completely shifted, and now I'm on a different line of research. So that's the best way to start, is just start reading.
And I'll just build on Dr. Eicher's point. The passion is really important. Something that you're intellectually curious about knowing and understanding. Also, as he mentioned, one of the big things is, how are you building on what has already been published? And he alluded to it with the gaps in the literature, but also think about, how can you examine topics from different perspectives? We all understand, when you're initially going through the literature review, you can feel like, wow, everybody's looked at it the way that it can maximally be looked at. And that's not necessarily the case. There's always different angles, different nuances. Obviously, the timing in which some research was conducted, it differs, pre-BCS, post-BCS, before the college football playoff, after college football playoff, conference realignment. I mean, there's a whole range of contextual factors that would influence why certain experiences or outcomes or arrangements may be differently. When you think about, pressing social movements, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, when you think of lawsuits related to gender equity pay, related to college athletes' access to their names, image, and likeness, all of those things could influence what you're researching and how you could look at it from a different angle. So in terms of building out your agenda, I would always encourage you to try to think about having a couple of broad areas that you're interested in, and then you have specific ways in which you're examining those connections. Oftentimes, there are going to be different streams that connect to the same core interest that you have, but there's just different topics that you're exploring in relation to that.
That was really well said. Thank you so much. And next question comes from something I experienced when I defended my dissertation, and someone asked me something about data I had but didn't do anything with. So, have any of you experienced building off of one project or data set into multiple publications?
I did with my dissertation, and I think that's often probably, especially initially, the most common because your dissertation is so big that to dwindle 200, 300 pages down to a 30-page article, it doesn't do it justice because there's so many different aspects you may have looked at. So as long as, and this is what I was told, and this has worked for me, that you're looking at something very different in each of them. And you're saying this is from a larger data set. So you are not, acting like you've done the same study 5, 6 different times potentially, or 2 or 3, however many you think you can get off. As long as you're upfront saying this segment comes from a larger data set, or I'm just looking at this theme from the interviews, and whatever that is, it just has to add something to the literature, going back to what Tommy said earlier. What is that gap and what are you adding? And as long as you feel that, whatever it is, whether it's your dissertation or you're just a part of a project that looked at so many different things, if you're adding something, then great. If you can do it in 2 articles, that's fantastic. If you can do it in 1 article, that's great too. But sometimes when you try to put it all in one, and I'm sure the others can speak to this as well, it's just too much in 1 article, and you're going to get the feedback of like, I don't know what to focus on. It's too much. Nothing is really developed because you tried to get, 300 pages into 30 and it's not working. And so you have to be really good at editing and get other people's perspectives, because you're so close to it sometimes that you don't see that, oh, this is redundant, you can cut this, or you really like this, but it's not adding something. And so I think it's really important to gauge others as well to see kind of what their thoughts are on that and what you can remove.
I'll jump in with this one too, Dr. Rubin. Oftentimes, I actually work backwards, and I've worked with a lot of people on this panel. So I tend to see what the data shows or what the themes show, and then I write my manuscripts based actually on the findings. So I tend to start with my results section first, then methods, then my literature review reflects what my results find, or what they don't find. My introduction, that who cares, why is this important, and then it makes the discussion a lot easier to write because you already have the literature review that's going to tie to your findings, and it makes the discussion just really a lot easier. So I actually work backwards, and I tend to get a lot of papers out of the same data set. And with that said, like Dr. Cooper brought this up earlier, really challenge yourself to look at your research from different lenses. And what's helped me to do this is applying my research to different special issues on topics I never even thought about applying my research to, but that's actually been really helpful and helped me to build my research agenda in ways I never thought.
That's great. And I'm curious which cat is visiting you right now.
Well, I have 4, so it's always a treat.
So you mentioned, finding special issue calls, Dr. Sikowski, and that was a really great segue into our next question, which is journal aims and scope. How do writers find a good fit for their work?
I guess we'll continue our cycle of our speakers. I do want to add one thing to the previous question, only because the 2 people who spoke are both qualitative, not quantitative researchers. I will caution, because we've had several articles that do this, and they are quick rejects, because if you're splicing and dicing something you've already done, then it's going to lead to a reject, because you're not really adding anything new. You're not giving us a true so what. You're just taking the same study and adjusting it just enough to provide something new-ish to the literature that's not really fully developing it. And so in the quantitative side, I would say be extremely purposeful. I have several data collection time points where if you get access to certain populations, if you can get them to complete the full survey or questionnaire, then do it, right? Especially if theoretically sound variables that you're measuring and can create multiple different studies, but do it intentionally, not kind of, well, what if we splice it this way and publish it, and then splice it that way and publish it, and then talk about it this way and publish it. It's a difference between qualitative and quantitative research for sure. I know you want to jump back in.
I need to jump in real quick, Tommy, because you bring up a great point. Like, and you're my friend, so I know that hopefully you take this, you know, how I meant it to be, but putting people into those categories, like you were like, oh, well, you and Amanda are qualitative researchers. Most of my publications are quantitative in nature, which actually kind of brings me to the first question that Dr. Rubin asked on, you know, how do you pick a research topic? I would tell people that are listening to this to not go down that road of being, I'm a strictly qualitative researcher, I'm a strictly quantitative researcher. Educate yourself to know a little bit about everything, because it helps you not only as a researcher, but as a reviewer too. Like, I know enough statistics, or I can read a manuscript and know, you know, that there's some sort of statistical methods that could have been done, or something that's missing. And so I think that's just a really good point to bring up, is that, you know, although Amanda and I are mostly qualitative researchers, that try to know a little bit about each type of methodology. It'll just make you a stronger writer and a stronger reviewer. Thanks, Tommy.
Sorry to put you in a box, Sarah. That was not my intent. And I am not just a quantitative researcher, but I will bring in experts like Amanda and you to help me with a qualitative research study for sure. So back to the aim and scope. Joey and I probably get, 2 papers a month maybe that are submitted to the Journal of Issues in Intercollegiate Athletics. And it's like, no, I mean, great, you use college athletes as a sample, but that doesn't really fit the journal. Just because you did this great study, sure, but it doesn't fit the journal. And that's a tough thing to do, because, you know, when you're trying to create that research study and design it appropriately, having the outlet in mind, or at least a few different outlets in mind, is really, really important. If I were to create an article for JIIA, it would probably be slightly different than if I were to submit it to JIIA or any other outlet, because the focus is a little bit different. The outcome is a little bit different. The practical implications, how I speak about that, is going to be a little bit different. And same with, you know, less specific journal outlets like IJSM or JSM, SMR, those types of journal outlets where it's a little more broad. But they also have a much stringent focus on different aspects of the research design, right? So JSM and SMR tend to be a lot more theoretical in design. Something like JASM, Journal of Applied Sport Management, is going to be a lot more practical in design and how you write. So that's a big component. One is what the story you're trying to tell is going to be. What is the narrative of the article? What is the potential outcome of that article? And then start writing towards that article. And then the other thing that I noticed with JIIA when we get these types of articles is that, you know, they'll be missing literature reviews. And in some fields, that's very common, right? Like in exercise science, they don't always have a 20,000 page literature review that summarizes everything like we expect in sport management sometimes. They'll have like a 2-page introduction and jump straight into methods. And that's not to say that that's not a well-designed study. It's just that does not work for our journal. So when you choose your journal, what I always do is I grab 2 or 3 articles and use them as models and just say, okay, this is how they wrote it. This is what I like about how they wrote it. And I'm going to follow that model because clearly that model works for that journal. And some are consistent across different journal outlets. But there are some uniqueness to, there's uniqueness to JIIA versus JAID for sure. And uniqueness between those two to like a JSM for sure. So having those model papers definitely helps.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what my colleagues have said. The first thing, as Dr. Eichert mentioned, is read the mission and the scope of the journal. And for example, our journal, JIIA, publishes primarily intercollegiate athletics in the United States. If you're looking at Canadians intercollegiate sport, if you're looking at South Korean intercollegiate sport, Australian intercollegiate sport, You may want to look at an international based journal or a journal that is based within that particular geopolitical context. So first, it would be looking at the mission statements. The second thing is looking at the editorial board. You know, look and see who some of the reviewers are, who's on the EB board, what are their specialties, what are their backgrounds, does it connect with some of the work that you've done? The third thing is review the previous issues in that journal. As Dr. Stokowski mentioned, oftentimes you could look at some of the special issues. You could look at the over time, what are some of the topics that have been covered? The fourth thing that I would recommend, and I did this earlier in my career, I still do it now, but because we've been doing this work for a little bit longer, we have a better idea of where we are going to be publishing now. But early on, I would just do searches to find out who's published work that's relevant to mine and where did they publish it. And for example, one of our colleagues, Dr. John Singer, he published in Race, Ethnicity, and Education, one of his seminal pieces over a decade ago. And I remember thinking to myself, well, do they accept sport-based research? And they don't accept a large amount of sport-based research, but occasionally they do. So then that became something on my list of, okay, this is a potential outlet, but it's not a guarantee in terms of that they will be open to this type of work. So I would encourage you, and I think it ties into the question that's typed in the chat, have a different genres, if you will, of areas that you want to publish in. It could be business focused. It could be more sociological focused. It could be marketing focused. And one of the things for those of you who are current doc students, and you're going to be in a faculty position soon, you really want to get clarity from your institution what counts towards tenure. What type of journals do they value? Do they ignore certain type of publications? And that could just help you make an informed decision. I'm not saying that you have to acquiesce to whatever the institution says, but it's better to know in advance, do you all only value journals with this impact factor? Do you all only value journals that are cited in this particular way? And that can kind of help inform where you choose to publish your work. Ultimately, you want to get your work out there, but as you move forward in your career, you also want to think to yourself, who do I want reading my work? So, you know, a part of it is doing what you need to do to advance in your career, but another part is strategically thinking, well, if I want different audience to be exposed to what I'm researching, I may need to step outside of the norm and publish in another journal. And I just want to echo the last point here that my colleagues mentioned. Collaborations are really important. You can be theoretically and methodologically versatile yourself, as Dr. Stokowski mentioned, looking at a similar data set with a different theory, asking different research questions, applying different methods, but also collaborating with your colleagues who bring a different lens to the work could also help you expand where you're publishing your work, as well as maximizing your data sets.
That was outstanding.
Can I say one thing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, oh, sure.
NASM has that really great list of journals. And I remember when I first started, I found that and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the holy grail. Because you could look and see like all these different things and look up the aim and the scope and like what potentially, like Dr. Eicher was saying, like 3 potential outlets. Like this is like the dream. We're going to shoot there first. And if not, like maybe here, because I mean, of course, like the JSMs, the SMRs, the SMQs, but do you know some of the other journals or other ones that are really niche focused that maybe aren't as high of an impact factor, but they're a perfect fit for your work? And I think that's a really kind of good place to start if you're trying to figure out where can I send this? Or if you haven't had luck sending it to option 1 or 2, but you feel like this is a good paper, there's a home for it somewhere. Like go to that list and see potentially some outlets that might work for you. But similar to what Dr. Cooper said in terms of like other people, look up people who are doing the work, look up their CV. Most of this stuff is available online on our faculty pages. So, if you look up Dr. Stokowski, you can see all the places she has published and like, neat, those are some outlets that publish the work I'm doing that's similar to what he or she is doing. So great. And I think that's, potentially a good strategy as well. But I really want to echo that do your research and don't send it, and don't waste your own time formatting it and sending it to a journal that is not going to be a good fit. And that maybe they're going to give you that desk reject very quickly, or maybe it's going to sit there for some time because some journals are very backed up. And then 2 months later, you get the desk reject, and now you've wasted 2 months because it just wasn't a good fit. And so it's on you to do the research as well and to look up the aims and the scopes and, like they said, the previous issues, and read some of the articles that they've put out, especially if it's a non-sport specific journal.
I wanted to add a resource. If you have access to the Ulrichs database in your university library, this is a database where you can search for peer-reviewed journals based on keywords, and that leads you to find their aim, scope, impact factor, and things like that, as well as Scopus. So those are some databases you can check out. Something that Dr. Cooper mentioned that I wanted to highlight was that, who do you want to read this work? That's often how I've approached, where to submit. And long before I thought I'd be co-editor of NACADA Journal, I knew that I wanted academic advisors to read about who are athletic advisors. And that's why I submitted to that journal, knowing 15,000 people emailed a printed copy of my article. And that's why I was determined to go through 5 revisions for that one. But that's not always the most fun. But if you have that goal in mind, you can try to get it. We did get some questions that kind of relate from in the chat. So I just wanted to ask, I want to put Dr. Stokowski on the spot here because we talk about this a lot. How do you navigate, if you're writing about sport and higher ed, between those two spaces and between journals and higher ed space and journals in the sports space, when you kind of feel like you're somewhere caught in the middle in those areas?
Well, I really want to reiterate Dr. Cooper's point on this, on look at what your T&P documents state. And like, if you saw me, Dr. Cooper, I was like, yes, look at what your T&P documents state and do what you need to do. And so I know, like at the University of Arkansas, it was peer-reviewed publication, 3 to 5 a year, first, second, or corresponding author. That's what they wanted. And so I was really strategic on where I submitted because I knew I needed quick hits if I was going to get that 5 a year. Although I'm with, so many of my colleagues, the impact factor is important, and it absolutely is, but also keeping your job is important, and meeting the expectations that your university has set up for you is really important. So don't let, I don't want to even use the word ego, but don't let ego or kind of this idea that we have to publish in really high impact factor journals to make a difference deter you from not doing that. Regarding navigating this kind of space between higher ed and sport, I would say it's really difficult. Some of my colleagues, and I can't wait for their paper to come out, recently looked at the top higher ed journals and do they publish sport research? And I believe no, the answer was no, they really didn't. In the last 10 years, I think the percentage was less than 1% of the higher ed journals published sport research. And is that very, it's sad, but it also, I think, has deterred me from publishing in those outlets because I'm the only untenured faculty member on this panel, and I don't have time to get rejects when I'm fighting for tenure, unfortunately. And so I have, and I think from this panel you've seen that journals have started. That's why JIIA started, was because higher ed journals were not publishing this work. That's why we started JAID, because higher ed journals were not publishing this work. And so as much as I want to say publish in higher ed journals, like let's try to build that gap. And I think that will come. And I think it is coming as this work is being published and as we're demonstrating a need for this work. But utilize the outlets that are here for you and that are supportive of you. And I know that if it's a good editor, and I can say every person on this panel is a great editor, I've worked with every one of them, they will guide you. I mean, I have submitted a paper before to a journal, and I've had the editor email me back and say, I really like this paper. It'd be a great fit for my journal, but do yourself a favor and submit here first, or do yourself a favor and look at this outlet and then come back to me. And I think that's what a good journal editor does. So don't be afraid to, ask editors, email editors. It only helps you. You get to know them, you get on their radar. Join editorial boards, like see if you can get on higher ed editorial boards, and see if you can get on all the sport editorial boards. You become I can't speak today. You become such a better writer when you do that. You become a better reviewer. You get to see all the scopes that we've all been speaking about. But that's a hard question, and I don't honestly know how to answer it, because it's a struggle, and it's, to be quite honest, it's a problem.
Thank you. That was a really good answer. Next, we're going to talk about something that I know is of interest to the audience, going behind the scenes in that peer review process. So could maybe each journal represented here talk about the timeline from when someone submits something to maybe when it gets the editor review to possibly the peer reviewers, and then like how do you select peer reviewers as an editor?
I guess we'll start back at the beginning of the alphabet, and only because I really want to correct Dr. Stokowski, because she corrected me earlier. She put me in the tenured box, and I am not currently yet tenured. I was tenured at a prior institution, and when moved, gave up tenure. I will happily talk to anybody about that decision off air here, but strongly encourage not doing that. But nonetheless, to answer kind of Matt's question, because he talked a little bit about, do you pick journals based on timeline? I will say that I will avoid journals based on timeline, not choose them based on timeline. And what I mean by that is I recently had an article in Revised Resubmit at a different journal, not one represented here. Revised Resubmit, 6 months, reject. I will never go back to that journal again. Like it just, until the editors change, because that was just way too long for it to sit in a system on a revised resubmit paper to be rejected. Not the outcome. The outcome's fine. There were flaws in the paper. I see the flaws based on the review, but it shouldn't take 6 months on a revised resubmit to get that. At the Journal of Issues in Intercollegiate Athletics, we, and I'll represent two here momentarily. So I'll talk about one and then kind of go briefly on the other one. The JIIA has a goal of 60-day turnaround. For those of you on the editorial board, you'll see later when we have our editorial board meeting, we're under that. We get it back pretty quickly. Joey and I collaborate really, really well together. We get an email with a submission, and one of us takes it, and usually within 24 to 48 hours, whether or not it is a desk reject article or if it's a moving on to the review process, and then it's 60-day turnaround within that. Usually both of us take a lot of time and effort if we desk reject to explain why that's the outcome. It's never just thanks for submitting, go submit it somewhere else. It is, here are the main components of why we're making this decision, and really trying to help out the author. The other journal that I'm the assistant editor for is Sport Entertainment Review. That one, we get it back within 30 days. It is not it's more of a practitioner journal, so it's not as heavy theoretical or heavy statistical methods and things like that. It's a lot more practical based journal. So when we send to reviewers, it's very quick. Papers are fairly short too, so we give them 30 days. And one of the things I do remember, I think it was Chad long ago when I joined the editorial board for JIIA, who told us at a board meeting, he said, I can give reviewers 30 days, I can give them 120 days, I can give them 5 years, and they're going to do it the day before it's due. So it doesn't really matter how long you give reviewers, they're going to get it done. So that's why we're pretty good. Usually we tell reviewers within 30 days, and then we start following it up after those 30 days so we can get it in within 40, 45 days. And I'll let Joey continue to talk about JIIA.
No, I mean, Dr. Eicher covered most of it. What I will say, and just adding to all my colleagues' point, is being strategic. You do have to consider, if a journal has a reputation of taking a year or more to get you feedback, you do have the right to email the editor to ask, could you please follow up on the status of the review? And you also have the right to say, I'd like to pull my article from consideration. Typically, you don't want to do that if it's been in the queue with that journal for a while, because you hope that it's closer to getting a favorable review. But at the same time, you do reserve that right. You don't want to submit a manuscript to multiple places at the same time. I want to make that clear. Ethically, that's problematic, because if it gets accepted both places, you run into the risk of plagiarism, being viewed as publishing the same thing in multiple places. So definitely, when you decide to pull from another, make sure that you get confirmation that it's no longer in review before you submit. But the idea, and Dr. Stokowski touched on this a little earlier, is you want to have at least enough papers at different phases, some that are ready for submission, some that are in progress, some that may be at the brainstorming phase, so that you can be strategic about where you submit. There are some journals where I'll submit a piece where I'll say, I don't mind waiting a little longer to hear back from that journal. Other pieces where I'm like how Dr. Stokowski said, hey, I'd like to get this out as soon as possible. I could think of some activism pieces that I was working on. And if it sat there for a year, it would be so dated by the time it was published. There's so much has happened, with athlete activism and sport activism, that I would have to rewrite the paper in a year if it didn't get accepted earlier. So just be strategic about where you're submitting. Definitely ask the editors, how long does it take? We're proud to announce that we're going to be on Scholar One Manuscript Central with JIIA. So for all those listening who will be submitting, the reason why that's important is because with certain databases, they alert reviewers when reviews need to be completed. And that could also expedite the review process. So just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, at Jade, we're very similar to JIIA, and it's under a 30-day turnaround generally. I will say that COVID has slowed, I think, every reviewer down a little bit, which is understandable. And we just communicate that to the authors that we're just waiting for one more review. You should have the decision within a week or something. Because we also have the system that notifies reviewers when it's due. You're 7 days out. Now you're 3 days out. Don't forget it's due tomorrow. Okay, it was due yesterday. And so those constant reminders, I believe, probably annoy reviewers enough that most of them tend to get us the review on time. And so I think in terms of Matt's question, looking at turnaround times as well as our journal, I would echo Dr. Cooper. How timely is it? Dr. Stokowski and I have a piece about athletes in COVID, and we were like, where can we send this? And it's going to come out sooner rather than later, because it doesn't make sense 2 years from now. Like, it doesn't make sense to know how they're experiencing it right now, when hopefully we are in a post-COVID world. And so that, I think, matters. And I remember being, an assistant professor waiting for, to go up for tenure, and those things of how many do I need? Okay, my requirements were not nearly as stringent as like 5 a year, but also I want to make sure I have the best case possible. And so how many can I get? And I think once you get tenure, you then get to sit back and say, I am going to do that piece in that journal that's going to take a longer time to get there, but I want it in this journal. And it's good enough, I believe, to get in this journal. And there's a little bit of playing the game to that also. Like, you need to get tenure, you need to keep your job. Or if you're a doc student, you want to get something on your CV so that you can show when you're going for jobs that you have the potential to have a research line and publish. So I think it's a little bit of, what are the requirements? What am I looking up against? And then, okay, I have tenure, fantastic. What do I want to do now? And there's almost like you can kind of parcel your career into 2 tracks. That pre-tenure, I need to hustle. So maybe I'm going to pick journals that have a quicker turnaround time, or that are open access, like, ours are up here, because I want people to see my work and I want them to cite my work, so then I can show my case of It's not this huge impact factor, but look how many citations this paper has in just 2 years. And so I think there's a lot of way you can kind of like finesse that and look at it when you're trying to figure out the outlet for you.
And I just want to quickly add to the conversation. I think that a point that was brought up earlier is really important. This idea of contacting editors. Do not be afraid to contact editors. I know as a doc student, even as a first year, first or second year faculty member at an R1, I was so scared to reach out to editors. I didn't want them to, think I didn't want to be annoying. I didn't want them not to like me. And now I have literally reminders set in my phone for every 60 days to look at a paper. And so I'll go into the portal and I'll check and see where it is. And then most likely between 60 and 90 days, I email the editor, what's going on here? Can you please help me navigate this process? I mean, it is the editor's job to help authors navigate the process. So do not be afraid to email them. You're not bothering us. This is why, editors are here. And sometimes we're so, to be honest, overwhelmed that it could be something like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot this review has been in and I just totally have forgot. So like email editors, do not be afraid. They do not mind. And offer to review, especially, once you get that terminal jury, offer to review. It is so helpful.
So another piece of this question was, how do you select reviewers for papers? And I put that out there because I know, Jade, while you have an editorial board, you often ask authors to submit names for additional reviewer possibilities, because sometimes it's methodology or other kind of content expertise. So yeah, Amanda, could you touch on that?
Yes, we ask for people because often, we try to match up your paper with people who know your content and the method. So they can say, yes, this is new and innovative because I know the work on this, versus, oh, it's a solid paper, but they don't realize it's been done before, and then we're not adding anything, and that's not helpful for anyone. So we look for that. If you suggest people, that's incredibly helpful to us, because sometimes, especially in the last year, it's hard to get reviewers, even if they are on your editorial board. I mean, I think there's a lot more no's, because I would assume JIIA is the same way. You expect a quick turnaround. And if I give you 30 days, 60 days, whatever days, you know that. And you know that I'm going to start, not only the system's going to remind you, then I'm going to remind you, like, hi, how are you? I'd like that review, please. And so if you could suggest people, it's fantastic. Don't suggest people you work with that are like 2 offices down, or someone that you collaborate a lot with, because a lot of times that's obvious and I'm not going to send it to that person. So that's not nice. Don't do that. Wayne asked a question in the chat that kind of relates to like how doc students can serve as reviewers. We have used some doc students because it was suggested by someone on our editorial board, like, I'm super busy, but I have a student, would you mind? Like, no, not at all, especially if there's someone that's later on in their, doc student career, I guess. And we'd be happy to. And so if anyone who's on this is interested, I'm sure all of us would be happy to kind of add you to the list of people, whether it's based on content, or you're like, I really like this type of methodology and I feel like I'm really good at that. So if you have a paper that deals with structural equation modeling, please send me that. Anything like that. If you just reach out, we're happy, I think, to add you to that. Even if it's just to get you experience, send you papers. Like, what would your review of this paper be? Like, let's practice. And if it's good, like, great. Like, we will add you to the rotation of people that we hit up, because it would make my life easier.
Thank you for addressing both those questions. NACADA Journal is similar. We have a managing editor that is an employee of NACADA, the executive office. So she does all the desk reviews of incoming articles. She'll do a brief summary and do a word count check, because we're pretty strict on our word count, excluding references. But then she'll send it to both of us, both editors, and then someone will take the article, kind of like they said, and run with it to send it to peer reviewers. And we have a 30-day review as well. So our system does very annoying reminders as well before and after the deadline for reviews. And I think it's a pretty efficient process. And since I mentioned that I was an author in this journal many years ago and had to go through some pretty rough revise and resubmits, I aim to never do that as an editor. And we have like a 2 resubmission max. We don't, rake people through the coals and then reject them. We also don't even reject you. We have a reject and refer. So we always will provide 1 or 2 journals that we think would be a good fit for the article. If it doesn't fit with us, we don't just want people to like slump off and be upset. So I think that's something that everything that everyone said here is that we want to develop writers. We want to help writers. So that's something that I feel like there's a lot of fear in terms of reaching out to editors, or fear about the process because it's so vague sometimes. And so just know that it's not, and that we want people to succeed. I've had people, set up a meeting with me in Zoom for an hour because they're trying to understand the feedback that they got from reviewers, and they want my take on what to do because it's confusing, and I'm willing to do it because I want them to have a good project. So that's something that just to keep in mind. Next question is about feedback. So it is hard sometimes to get constructive feedback on something that you've spent hours and hours of your life, maybe years of your life on, especially if it's your dissertation. It's like your baby, right? So what tips do any of you have in any order that you want to go in to work with the feedback once you receive it from your reviewers, and then transform or revise or update that manuscript for publication?
I don't want to break the mold. I mean, we set this pattern, right? Well, the first thing we do is we want to go find reviewer 2. I kid, because it really is always reviewer 2. Almost every single time. I think for me, it's there is that initial like anger, frustration, whatever adjective you want to use for it, right? Looking at this review and saying like, "What, did you read my paper?" Right? Because clearly you didn't read my paper. If that's your review, you didn't read it. And then after I get past that initial thing, I start to look at like, okay, what are they really saying? What am I really missing? What am I not explaining in my paper that is making them think something differently? Recently, I think it was mid last year, and I started in 2009 to give you how long I've been publishing and all this stuff. Late last year, I got a review back from a journal, and this has completely changed my model. The first half of the review were the 5 things that we did really, really well on our paper. And then the last 4 pages of the review were all the things that we needed to fix. But that first 5, like it was literally like 5 sentences. And it was really great to see like, okay, this paper does have merit, right? It took the sting away from, okay, here are all the ways that you can improve. I've always been a big fan when I write my reviews to not hurt feelings, to not tell people that they're bad or anything like that. My reviews tend to focus on, okay, you did this is okay, but now we got to get it to here and make it a lot better. Because there's method issues, there's theory issues, there's whatever issues are in the paper that just aren't sound. And I hope that the way feedback is given is going to change in time, because I have been told that I'm a complete blithering idiot and I have no clue what I'm doing in research in a review. And that's bad. My favorite though is when I was told that I needed to go read my work, like Eicher et al.'s work, to better frame the study. That was hilarious to me. But then I also had to think, okay, well, what am I missing in my own work that I need to go fix? Because clearly I don't know what I've been doing for the past 10 years. So I think that I'm a big fan of read it. And then I run. So I read my reviews and I go for a run. Like I'll read it first thing in the morning and then go run. Because that way it just clears my head. It gets me away from it. It gets me through that like vitriol towards the reviewers who gave me a bad review. And then it gives me a space to get inside the thoughts about the article to figure out, okay, they said this. Now what do I really need to be doing to address what that issue was?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, just always keep in mind, I know, especially when you're first starting out, it's really hard. From my experience, it does get easier to handle feedback. Over time, it does, because you start to realize that a lot of this is just subjective. I've had certain papers that went one place and were called dubious, and at another journal where this is the best thing since whatever. And it's like, it's the same paper. Like, well, what's going on here? But it's subjective. You know, people have their own theoretical proclivities or biases, methodological, philosophical. Sometimes the arguments you're making in your papers, maybe that scholar doesn't agree with. What I would say, just to echo what Dr. Eicher said, is that try to find what are they saying that could make this work better. And when you give yourself time, you know, I think Dr. Paula Koba mentioned in our conversations before we got on, you really want to try to give yourself 24 to 48 hours to just kind of sit back and digest it. And don't respond immediately. Early in my career, I did that a few times. You know, as Dr. Eicher mentioned, I was emotional and I wanted to express like, well, this doesn't make sense. And especially when certain language was used, because sometimes the language, and that to all of us as we know, our role is to serve as buffers, if you will, between the reviewers and the authors, so that if certain language is used, we are supposed to be able to temper that. And we also, it's our responsibility to talk to reviewers who do use language that may be a little personally offensive or a little excessive or scathing, to notify them. And then sometimes we may even ask them, we might even remove them from the board. I know we've had, you know, in the past, you know, multiple reviewers who, you know, may not have followed what we asked them to do in terms of guidance, and we've had to respectfully remove them. So that does happen, even though as the author, that may not make you feel good at the moment. At least know that there are editors who empathize with your position and are trying our best to make sure that you are receiving constructive feedback that's helpful. The last point that I'll mention, you do have the right, once again, to just say, no, I don't want to change the paper in that way. And you have a couple of options when you do that. You can resubmit it back to that journal and give a case, because a lot of this is just making a case for yourself why you didn't do it. At that point, it's up to the editor and the reviewers as to whether, you know, your response was satisfactory and whether it moves forward. But you also have the option of saying, I don't want to change it and I would like to take it somewhere else. I've done that on numerous occasions where I felt like the reviewers were not experts on the content area I was writing on, because their feedback clearly demonstrated that they weren't familiar with the literature that I was writing for. So in my mind, it just wasn't the right fit. And so I ended up, you know, saying, hey, no, I don't feel comfortable changing the whole focus of this piece, because that's not why I wrote it that way. I'm going to go somewhere else. So just know that when you do get that feedback, you do have some agency. But ultimately, I will say this, majority of the feedback that I've gotten in my career, even the ones that have been a little more scathing, it does help you become a better scholar. And I say that in a spirit of love and endearment. There's ways that sometimes when we're so close to the work, it's hard for us to see it from a different lens. But typically there's new literature, new ways of looking at it, that once you take a step back and incorporate it, it does make the manuscript better. So just know there is light at the end of the tunnel.
I will say the things that get me the most angry, and they still get me angry 13 plus years later, are the people when I'm doing, you know, tell me that I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm not one of the mixed people. Like, send me the qualitative stuff. I don't do the numbers. But then they ask me like, oh, but you didn't talk about the N. Or I'm like, oh, I told you how many people, but it's not always an N. But neat. Okay, I can add that. But what was your hypothesis? And I was like, oh, like we paid zero attention to research methods, like zero. And so like sometimes I'll tell the editor, I need you to send this to someone with qualitative experience. Don't send it to, might have great content matchup and have them review for content, but not my method, because it's not appropriate. Just as I would not take on something with, you know, crazy statistics in it, I'd be like, you need to send it to somebody else. I'm happy to look at the content, but this is not where my skill set lies. And I think both as authors, you need to advocate for yourself, but as someone who's either reviewing at whatever level, as an editor or a reviewer, you need to be like, this is just, I'm self-aware enough to know this is not good. It's not going to work out for anyone. My feedback is not going to be helpful to that author for this portion. And so I think that's really important as well, especially when you're an author, to please specify, can you send this to someone that has experience with X? And again, as an author, you can put those people in the, potential reviewer areas.
I think that there's a method to writing. And to be honest, I feel like early in my career, I didn't really get it. But the better you organize your paper, the easier it makes it to review. So make your paper organized, use subheadings, and it makes it way easier to review. As far as rejections go, I still take it personally. I still cry and get a Big Mac. It doesn't get better. But now, as opposed to earlier in my career, I go into it thinking this will probably get rejected, but this is where I'm going next. And I don't even change it. I get it rejected and immediately I resubmit it to the next journal, because I always have 2 or 3 on my list for every paper I submit. Like, hey, this is where I'm going to go first. If this doesn't work, I'm going to go to B. And then if that doesn't work, I'm going to go to C. If it doesn't get past journal B, I know there's a problem with my paper. Because like Dr. Cooper said, this is very subjective. So you never know. You could they could hate it. And then the next one, it's the best thing since sliced bread, right? And so I never change it until I get that second reject. And then after that second reject, I do look at it really critically, and then I'll go through and change it. But I think for those of us that publish a fair amount, it just takes too much time to go and rewrite a paper before resubmitting it again. So I always recommend, that until you get that second reject, don't change it. Just see what the second journal says. And especially if you're going to send it to a journal that has a quick turnaround, a 30-day turnaround, you could find out in 30 days what they feel is wrong with it before you have a chance to even resubmit it. So that's my strategy. I don't know if that's the best strategy, but it works for me. And also, I know sometimes reviewers can sound harsh, but as someone that reviews a lot of articles, and I know this might sound badly, but I review so much that I don't have time to really think about to be like, this is really great, but change it to this. I mean, I'm literally looking at it and being like, please make this change, or this is not correct, or please cite this person. So don't necessarily think that how the reviewers word things and because being kind of short is them being rude. It might just be them being busy and trying to get you, the most amount of feedback, but in the quickest time.
I'll just add a little bit of not to go in opposition to Dr. Skowski, but I always recommend, if someone rejects you and gives you some feedback, to make those changes, because in our field, it's quite small. There's a lot of people who review on multiple boards. And so I know if I just reviewed your paper for one journal and then I get it for another and you made no changes, I will pretty much refuse to review it again and say, I already gave this feedback. This person needs to do it again, or these authors, because I don't want to do it again. I mean, I could copy and paste, but then they didn't learn anything from the experience, in my opinion. So that's just something I'll throw out there. I know we had a couple of questions that Dr. Eicher and Dr. Cooper answered they typed in their answers, so please check those out. I think we've got just a couple minutes left, so I don't know if any of you just want to throw out some general wisdom, because everything you've said has been very helpful. I've learned a lot. I know we got a wonderful comment in there too from one of our audience, so feel free to add any tidbits on this last few minutes.
I'll throw out one thing. Oh, I guess it's kind of a twofold thing. One, we are all in academics and education because we care and we want to help people. If there is an author who you're reading and you just love their work, email them, contact them, talk to them. They are going to be willing to help you. I know this isn't the right conference, but one of my favorite things about NASM, maybe my only favorite thing about NASM. No, I'm kidding. But one of my favorite things about NASM that they do is the student initiative, the mentorship program that they do. I still have mentors that I have never researched with them. I've never published with them, but I talk to them probably 2-3 times a year about where they are in this process, where they are on the journey, what articles are they working on. So a lot of us are here to help. Clearly, we would not have gotten into a helping profession if we didn't like helping other people. And finding collaborators will help you on that journey. I mean, there's not a single person on this screen right now who doesn't have multiple authors on papers and multiple authors that they're consistently working with. And so reaching out, building those collaborations and building that network will just help your career going forward.
Yeah, I'll just add, all of us, whoever you admire or someone you may look up to in the field, someone who's a distinguished scholar, a dean, a chancellor, or in a provost position, everyone's gotten a rejection, and I guarantee have gotten multiple rejections. It's a part of the process. If you look at it in a metaphor to being an athlete, you're not going to make the mark every time. You're not going to have your best day every time. The goal is to just get better each day. As Dr. Paula Koba mentioned earlier, every manuscript typically has a home. It might take a while to get it there. It might take some adjustments or modifications for it to finally land, but it does have a home, and it's just a matter of working on your craft, developing your work, and also just seeking outlets that are receptive to your work. And Dr. Stokowski mentioned it earlier. I mean, there's certain institutions that may only value certain kind of work, and you may need to go somewhere else, and that's not a bad thing. I think ultimately you want to be your authentic self as a researcher. I'm not against being versatile and being adaptable, but when you get to the point to where if you're writing work and you can't even see your own self in the work, like in terms of your thinking, you're essentially being somebody else just to get published. I just don't think that's healthy. Your scholarly identity should be connected to your core identity. And not saying that in a biased way, but in terms of how you go about intellectually doing the work. There's several pieces where I have found things that were contrary to what I actually think or believe, but based on the data and based on the theory used, that is what provided the best explanation. So, and that led me down further research to find, well, let me explore this a little bit more. Am I totally wrong on this, or is it just this happened in this particular context or in this way? So I would just say be persistent, create a support system. All of us on this panel, we've known each other for several years. We see each other at conferences. We've reviewed each other's papers, probably blind in many cases, but we are familiar with each other's work. And it's important just to have a support system as you're going through this process. Some of that will be developed at your institution with your colleagues while you're going through graduate school, but others you'll meet along the way. So just surround yourself with people who help affirm you and help you develop. Like everyone said, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us or any of the editors when you have questions about how you can improve your scholarship.
I dislike following Dr. Cooper, so we're going to have to, if we do this again, figure out a different method going around the horn type thing. I would say don't be afraid when you get your feedback and you're angry, step away. Like Tommy runs, like I would probably play on Twitter or something, but do whatever you need to kind of just get away and then go back. Like, what is a valid point? What do you just want to discard? Because that's fine too. But have a reason, especially if it's a revise and resubmit, for why you're not doing it. Don't say like, I just don't want to. Like, that's not real. Like, you don't want to because why? Like, I'm not doing that because that's contrary to qualitative research, or I'm not changing this wording that you don't like because you're actually incorrect based on this, and give like a citation or whatever. So it's not just you telling them that they don't know anything. But also when you look at it, and if they want you to add more theory or to change your statistics or do something different, and that's not what you're good at, bring somebody in. Don't have a big enough, like your ego is so big that you don't know when to ask for help, because you know, I get brought in for certain things. I'll bring in other people for certain things just because I'm like, I don't want to do this or I'm not good at this. And so I think that's what I've learned over the years is ask other people to help. You don't have to do this on your own. And I think similar to what Dr. Cooper said, we've known each other for 10 plus years. And so look to other grad students or look to other junior faculty across that are doing these things because we're all at different schools. So it's not a matter of, well, if I'm going to get tenure, you're not going to get tenure. Most of us are willing to help, especially those of us that have achieved tenure. We're happy to help jump on a project or collaborate on a project and take second or third author because it no longer matters to me, my authorship order. Like I don't get bonus points now for being first author. So
I thought we're out of time. That's why I didn't say anything. I think this was a really great panel, and I echo what my colleagues have said. I don't have a single authored publication. I really think it's important to collaborate. And I know my institution values collaboration. I've learned so much from every single person on this panel who has mentored me in one way or another throughout the last 10 years. I can't believe I'm saying that, throughout the last 10 years. But I would just, write every day. The more you write, the better writer you become. The more you read, the better writer you become. Just keep writing. And Ruben, what did you have up there? Or sorry, Lisa, Dr. Ruben. Yay, yes, yay writing. Write, read, ask for feedback. I mean, some of my best friends are on this panel, Lisa and Amanda. I talk to them probably daily, and I'm constantly sending them papers that they're not authors on and just asking them for feedback. So don't be afraid to do that. We have such a wonderful community. And I think the more that we can progress scholarship in sport management, the more we can progress our field. And so I really hope that this panel was helpful. And thank you so much for putting this together, Dr. Ruben. This was awesome.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I was waiting, at least I didn't want to jump in front. We've come to the end of the time allotted for the workshop. I want to thank all of you for taking the time and this opportunity to share your expertise. I have tremendous respect for everybody on this panel. I think you're doing a great job. I'm so pleased that you were able to share your expertise with the CSRI audience. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in Columbia this time next year. And I will make the standing offer. The first drink will be on me. So there you go. Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending. And this brings us to the conclusion of the 2021 virtual CSRI conference on college sport. Take care, everybody.